Imagine standing in a field of tobacco under the August moon. The night should be alive with crickets, owls, and the whisper of summer wind. But in Southampton County, Virginia, on August 21st, 1831, there was only silence, and then a sound no one had ever heard before, a chorus of voices chanting scripture not from the Bible, but from something older, something buried in the soil long before white settlers arrived. Children swore the moon turned red, dogs refused to bark, and when the first scream shattered that silence, it was already too late. By sunrise, a rebellion unlike any America had ever seen was underway, led not just by a preacher, but by a man who believed he had been chosen to open the gates of hell itself. His name was Nat Turner. And this is not the story you were taught in school. This is the story they buried. Nat Turner was born into bondage in 1800, a slave, yes, but also something more. From a young age, he was marked by visions. He claimed he could see patterns in the stars, hear whispers in the wind, and interpret signs in the flight of birds. To some, these were miracles, to others, curses. His enslavers grew uneasy when he recited scripture with a fire that seemed older than Christianity itself. Local white ministers called him the prophet, but whispers among the enslaved said his eyes didn't just look at you, they looked through you, and when he spoke of judgment, it wasn't the gentle salvation of Christ. It was a reckoning, blood for blood, grave for grave. Southampton County was built on lies. Churches rang bells proclaiming salvation, yet their pews were filled with men who whipped, chained, and sold human beings as if they were cattle. The soil was rich, but it had been fed with more blood than rain. Every plantation was a graveyard, every tobacco barn a confessional of screams, and yet the white families believed themselves safe, protected by guns, patrols, and the walls of their faith. They feared ghosts, but not the living. They feared Indian curses, but not the rage of the enslaved. They feared damnation, but not justice. What they never understood, what they refused to see, was that their preacher, the man they allowed to baptize their children and read from their pulpits, was watching, always watching. Nat Turner stood in their churches by day, but by night he walked the fields, whispering to the enslaved that the hour of retribution was at hand. On February 12, 1831, the sun vanished. The sky went black at midday, and the air filled with a choking silence. To whites in Southampton, it was a curiosity, an omen perhaps, but one quickly dismissed. To Nat Turner, it was confirmation. He told his followers the heavens had spoken. God himself had commanded him to lead an uprising. Yet not all who followed Turner believed the visions were of God. Some whispered the voice came from something older, spirits from Africa, gods of thunder and iron, carried across the ocean in chains. Others claimed it was the land itself, poisoned with centuries of blood, demanding release. Whatever the truth, the eclipse was a seal. The rebellion was no longer a question of if, but when. In secret cabins, far from the overseer's eyes, a covenant was sworn. The enslaved gathered around a fire that crackled like bones breaking. Turner preached not from scripture, but from memory, from visions, from dreams that left him shaking in the night. They sharpened tools into blades. They hid axes beneath floorboards. They swore oaths sealed in blood and silence. The plan was not just to kill, it was to cleanse, to tear down every house built on stolen lives, to leave Southampton County not as a place of masters and slaves, but as an empty scar, uninhabitable, haunted. And yet within their silence there was fear, not of failure but of Turner himself. They said when he spoke his voice wasn't his own, that in his sermons there was something else speaking through him. The rebellion began in the early hours of August 21st. Turner and his men moved like shadows across the fields, carrying axes and clubs, blades sharpened on stones worn smooth by centuries. The first family they struck never woke. Their screams were muffled by pillows, their throats cut before the dawn. Children were not spared, no one was. In that house the rebellion baptized itself in blood. From there the killings spread, farmhouses, cabins, churches. Each stop another act of judgment. Turner walked among the dead, silent, his face unreadable. Some swore he prayed as he struck. Others said he did not blink, did not tremble, did not pause. The blood flowed, and with each life taken, it seemed he grew stronger. like a man feeding on the very fear he unleashed. By morning the town bells rang in terror. Patrols rode out, guns drawn, dogs unleashed. But the rebellion had already carved itself into history. Dozens were dead, families slaughtered in their beds, word spread like fire, igniting panic across Virginia. Some said it wasn't just men following Turner, it was something else. That shadows moved in the woods, that the air itself screamed. Slaveholders whispered of African curses, of demons loosed upon the land. In the churches, ministers prayed louder, their hands trembling as they clutched their Bibles. But prayers could not erase what had been done, and the most horrifying truth was this: the rebellion had not failed, not yet, for Turner was still at large, and he was not done. The rebellion left more than corpses. It left silence. For miles, the fields of corn and tobacco lay untouched, tools dropped mid-harvest, animals restless in their pens. Smoke drifted from cabins where fires had been set. Crows gathered, circling endlessly, their calls sounding almost human. Survivors whispered that the soil itself had changed. When blood was spilled in such quantity, they said, the land remembered. Horses refused to step into certain clearings. Wells turned foul overnight. Women claimed their children woke screaming with dreams of men without faces, chanting psalms in the dark. Southampton County was no longer a place of industry. It was a wound, and the wound would not close. As the rebellion spread, so did the retaliation. Militias formed. Armed men scoured the woods, dragging out anyone they suspected of joining Turner. The executions were swift, brutal, and indiscriminate. Men were hanged from trees, women whipped until their backs were raw, children left to starve. Some victims had never even seen Turner, yet their lives were offered to the mob's fear. What began as a rebellion turned into a purge. Turner's name became a curse, a justification for horror. Entire families were erased not because they fought, but because someone whispered they might have. Southampton was drowning in blood, and yet the preacher himself had vanished. For weeks, Nat Turner eluded capture. He slipped through forests, hid in barns, and vanished into swamps. Slave catchers swore they had cornered him, only to find nothing but footprints leading into impossible places. Some said he walked with spirits that trees bent to hide him. Others whispered he had discovered tunnels beneath the plantations, hollow spaces dug long ago by those who had tried to escape. These tunnels, they said, were older than the rebellion. Places of prayer, of ritual, of buried offerings, and perhaps places of power. Turner was no longer merely hunted. He was a phantom, a nightmare loose upon the land. When Turner was finally captured in October, the town believed it was over. They brought him to trial, forced him to speak. His words were written down in a document called the Confessions of Nat Turner. But what survives is not the truth. Witnesses swore that his words were darker, stranger. That he spoke of visions not from God, but from something older. That he had seen angels whose wings dripped with blood. That he had heard voices commanding him to rend the earth open and feed it with flesh. The official record sanitized these horrors, erasing what could not be explained. But fragments survived, in diaries, in whispers, in the haunted faces of those who heard him. Turner's rebellion was not just political. It was spiritual, it was ritual. On November 11, 1831, Nat Turner was hanged, or so the records say, but not all who gathered believed he died. Some swore the rope snapped and he rose again. Others whispered that his body never grew cold, that the hangman's noose tightened around an empty husk. His flesh was cut, burned, and scattered, but still rumors persisted that his eyes lingered in the dark. Mothers told their children not to wander after sunset, lest they hear the preacher's voice calling them from the woods. The state declared him dead, the church declared him damned, but among the enslaved a different truth circulated. Nat Turner had not died, he had simply gone underground, waiting. The Confessions of Nat Turner circulated in print, but something was missing. The locals whispered of additional pages, removed, hidden, locked away. These fragments spoke not only of prophecy but of ritual, markings carved into trees, chants repeated in secret, visions of rivers running red with blood. Some claimed these pages were confiscated by the church, buried deep in its archives. Others insisted they were burned, though no ashes were ever found. But every few years, a new preacher would arrive in Southampton and seem Different, their sermons darker, their eyes glowing with the same fire that once burned in Turner's. The missing pages had not vanished. They had found new mouths to speak through. In the rebellion's wake, hundreds of children were left orphaned, black and white alike. The state gathered them into hastily built orphanages, where silence hung heavier than prayer. The children spoke of nightmares. They claimed they saw Turner standing at the foot of their beds, his face half-shadow, whispering scripture twisted into curses. Some drew symbols no one could explain. Others refused to eat, saying the bread tasted of ashes, the water of iron. Years later, many of these children would disappear, vanishing into the woods without a trace. No one searched, no one dared, for everyone understood the truth. Those children had not been abandoned, they had been claimed. Southampton's churches split after the rebellion. Some doubled down, preaching obedience, insisting Turner was an agent of the devil. Others whispered that he had been a prophet, punished not for sin but for revealing too much truth. In secret meetings, enslaved men and women carried Turner's name like a hymn, a forbidden word that could mean salvation or damnation depending on who heard it. One church, built atop the site of a plantation massacre, was said to ring its bells without human hands. The congregation abandoned it, but the building still stands. Travelers claim to hear chanting inside long after midnight. The white families of Southampton carried scars deeper than the lash. They could not speak Turner's name without trembling. Some forbade their children from asking about the rebellion. Others built entire genealogies erasing 1,831 as though silence could rewrite history. But secrets have weight. In diaries tucked beneath floorboards, in journals sealed in trunks, the truth remained. Generations later, descendants discovered that their own great-grandparents had participated, not only in suppressing the rebellion but in slaughtering innocents afterward. The Turner Rebellion was not just a moment of horror. It was an infection passed down through bloodlines. By the mid-19th century, theological seminaries across Virginia avoided teaching Nat Turner's name. Professors whispered that his visions were not madness but revelation, too close to the truth of Scripture to be dismissed, too dangerous to acknowledge. Some claimed Turner had tapped into the same divine wrath that prophets of old once wielded. Others said his visions were not divine at all but something else, older, nameless. To study Turner, they warned, was to risk opening a door that could never be closed. So the seminaries buried him in silence. But silence is never empty, it echoes. Near the woods where Turner once hid, there lies a clearing no map records. Locals avoid it. Cows refuse to graze there. Beneath the grass lie unmarked graves. Slaves and masters alike, buried without ceremony after the rebellion. On fog-heavy nights, passers-by swear they hear hymns rising from the earth. Others see pale figures kneeling in prayer, their faces hidden, their mouths moving in unison. When the fog lifts, nothing remains but the sound of flies buzzing over the soil. This is where the rebellion never ended. This is where the land still remembers. They hanged him, they cut him, they scattered his remains, and yet Nat Turner endures. Not in body, but in story, in nightmare, in the pulse of a land that has never healed. His rebellion was not erased, it was buried alive. And sometimes when the sun darkens, when the wind carries strange whispers through the trees, you can still hear him, preaching, calling, waiting, for judgment delayed is never judgment denied. And in America, the preacher who never died is still speaking, whether we choose to listen or not.